Ready? This is Fred Gamble. In March of 1959, Lucky Kasner and I got together to organize and promote America's first industry-backed international racing team, which we called CAMORADI USA. One of our major backers were Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, Chevrolet, Shell BP, Exide Batteries, Dow Chemical, Champion Spark Plugs, and several others. We became the factory team for Maserati in 1960 and were part of the international Corvette effort that year at Sebring and Le Mans. This home movie shows a small part of the CAMORADI story at Sebring in 1960 and 61. I was fortunate to be able to drive Corvette number 3 of the team. We entered 2 Corvettes, 3 Maseratis, 2 Porsche Carreras, and 1 Oscar 750. I started number 3. This is me in the light brown shirt talking to a friend, getting ready for the start. Our lead driver on the Corvettes was national champion Jim Jeffords. I was very fortunate to be able to get everything together on the start and lead the field away in my first international race. As you can well imagine, that was quite a thrill for me. And the field follows us through the first turn. Humorous part of this story is that every commercial film that I've seen, I'm completely out of the picture because they were focusing on the hero drivers and the Ferraris and Maseratis further back in the field. So I was completely cut out. And the only claim to reality I have about this story is this movie made by my brother. Number 3 Corvette is the car that I was in. I drove for about 45 minutes and then saw the Jim Jeffords lead Corvette in the pits for an unexpected pit stop. That's one of the works Porsches, one of our Maseratis, me in the Corvette. I saw Jim Jeffords' Corvette in the pits, so I prepared to pull in to hand over my good car to our lead driver. I started the race, as I said, this number 3 Corvette with a red nose. Coming into the pits, I thought my day was over. Scrambled out over the wall, went to talk to Jeffords in the red helmet. Jim was twice U.S. national champion in Corvettes, one of America's best amateur drivers. He had a fine racing record. Gave him my car, which was hardly warmed up, certainly not overstressed. Jim's car apparently had the throttle stick and over-revved the engine, bounced the valves, damaged the engine. Here, Lee Lilly, our chief mechanic, tells me that the car will run, but it won't go fast. This is Carroll Shelby. He had just started our second Maserati, and the engine blew up very promptly. The lead Maserati, driven by Dan Gurney and Carroll Shelby, that was me going out in Jim Jeffords' car, running at limited revs. This is our second Porsche Carrera, driven by Johnny Cuevas. That car did not finish. Sterling Moss brings our lead Maserati in for a stop, gives Dan Gurney his personal instructions. One of the Goodyear engineers checks the tires. Sterling is finished. He had a little chat there with Master and Gregory, who didn't get a drive. Dan Gurney in the dark blue, white stripe helmet, off to take our Maserati into the lead. That car ran away and built up a huge lead of 6 laps by 8 o'clock at night when the transmission failed. That's one of our Maseratis. Number 4 is the number 4 Corvette. I'm driving that at that time at limited revs, and a GT Ferrari passes me in the fast corner on the approach to the hairpin. One of our Mazers, me again in the Corvette. That's Sterling Moss, white helmet, raked back. The round-tailed Maserati there is Dave Causey Steer Maserati. That was Dan Gurney. This is our Porsche Carrera, driven by Floridian amateur drivers Dick Duncan and Joe Shepard. They did a fabulous job to drive that car very quickly but conservatively, finished 9th overall. This is Dan Gurney leaving the pits and Lucky Kasner waving him out. That's Jim Jeffords coming in for his pit stop, and his co-driver Bill Westhoff taking off. Here I come in for refueling. Routine stop. Lucky Kasner's worried about my condition. I said, heck, I've got the best the best seat in the house. I'm having a wonderful day. I don't need any relief. So they let me keep going. Didn't bother me. I drove the whole 12 hours and gained a little press attention for being Iron Man Gamble. But it was one of the highlights of my life and my short racing career to drive this entire 12 hours at Sebring. We took this car on to the 24 Hours of Le Mans. It's a showroom stock Corvette, and we finished 10th overall in the 1960 24 Hours of Le Mans. The race fades into darkness, and we then jump to 1961. This is the start of the Formula Junior race. The 12-hour race we were just watching was won by the Porsches of Oliver Jean de Bienne and Hans Hermann. It was a works car. The works Porsches and Ferraris theoretically boycotted the race because of a fuel dispute. They didn't want to run their factory cars on the Amoco gasoline that was provided by the sponsors. This is the 1961 Formula Junior race, in which most of the American star drivers of the day competed. The rear-engine cars were coming to the fore at that time. This was early in the season, and the front-engine cars, which started the Formula Junior type of racing in Italy, were now completely outmoded by the newer Coopers and Lotuses from England. Jim Hall, Walt Hanskin, a number of George Constantine, a number of the top American drivers of the day were driving these cars. And as I recall, the race battle was, this is the silver car there, is the first of the rear-engined Elvas. I think that's a front-engine Elva. The white car is Walt Hanskin in the Cunningham Cooper. I think that's probably Jim Hall going around in a Lotus. And as I recall, it was Hanskin and this Lotus, this is an Elva right here, but Hanskin and the white Cooper racing with the green Lotus. A relatively unknown Piggott was his name from Seattle, Washington. I believe he won the race in that Lotus. But they put on a good show, and it was quite an interesting event. This is my sister-in-law, Irma Gamble. She and my brother Hank would fly up from Fort Lauderdale for the races. Here we have the start of the 61 race. Four or five Corvettes lined up at the beginning of the field. And the CAMORADI and Cunningham teams were introducing the new rear-engine birdcage Maseratis, which were a totally unsuccessful car. Evil handling cars, very unreliable. CAMORADI had two cars. Theoretically, the rear-engine car was for Sterling Moss and Graham Hill, but Moss decided the rear-engine car was so evil handling, he gave it to Maston Gregory here going by in number 24. Maston and Lucky Kasner drove number 24, and here's Sterling Moss in the front-engine birdcage, which he shared with Graham Hill. Neither Maserati lasted, nor did the rear-engine Maserati of the Cunningham team. They were very fragile and ill-prepared. They were prepared at the factory. All the Maseratis that CAMORADI raced were entirely maintained by the factory, not by CAMORADI. 61, the works Ferraris were there, plus a big covey of privateer Ferraris. So they really put on a major effort to win this event. And as I recall, Phil Hill went on to win in a factory Ferrari. That would be Sterling Moss in the white helmet with his hat raked back. One of the works Porsches. Number 50, that would have been driven by Joe Bonnier and Eddie Barth. Number 12, the dark Ferrari GT, was owned and driven by motor racing journalist Denise McCluggage. And Denise was a good friend of mine, and she invited me down to co-drive with her in this 61 race. She brought me along because she wanted her boyfriend, Alan Eager, a jazz musician, to drive with her in the race. However, being a jazz musician, he apparently had a drug problem, and neither of us believed he could pass the physical. And we didn't think the organizers would let Alan drive because he'd never driven a race before. But the race organizers wanted the star personality there, so they let Alan drive in the race. Denise coached him. He passed his physical. They drove a fabulous race. I never got to drive, and they won the GT category. Did a super job. All the square-tail Ferraris here are the works cars. The round-tail Ferraris are the privateer cars. Number 17 Ferrari would be Pedro and Ricardo Rodriguez of Mexico. I was honored to get to know them quite well. Number 15 was Richie Ginther and Willie Mares in the works number 2 car. There's a number 24 with, that would be Maston Gregory driving. and a square-tailed conventional birdcage following it. Number 20, that's Walt Hanskin or Bruce McLaren in the Cunningham rear-engine Maserati. They were following a Aston Martin. Number 23, one of the square, that would be Moss again in the front-engine Type 61 Maserati. Number 51, Bob Holbert and Roger Penske. 48 would be Dr. David Lane and Chuck Castle of Fort Lauderdale. Two of the round-tailed privateer Ferraris, that was Rodriguez brothers, and number 16 would be George Reed and Bill Sturgis. Ferraris were indestructible in those days. They would run long and strong in all the distance races. They were just virtually unbeatable. Number 23, Sterling Moss, waving his arm at all the competition. Everybody get out of my way. I'm coming through. That was typical Moss aggressiveness. This is probably Bruce McLaren in the Cunningham rear-engine Maserati. A Porsche RSK, looks like Dan Gurney, passing a Corvette. Number 17, the Rodriguez brothers. And as I said, all the Maseratis failed in the 61 race. This is a round-tailed birdcage, the only one built like that by the Causey brothers. Number 22 Ferrari was Jim Hall and Bob Mears, running a North American racing team Ferrari, as were the Rodriguez brothers. Silver helmet, that's Bruce McLaren. 51 Porsche against Holbert and Penske. There's a Porsche leading an Arnold Bristol. Number 15 Ferrari. Number 17 was the Rodriguez brothers. 15 Richie Ginther and Willy Mares. Willy Mares of Belgium. Drove for Ferrari for many years. Number 20, that looks like Walt Hanskin in the Cunningham car at that point. Another Ferrari that was not, or a Maserati that was not a CAMORADI car. That was Ferrari passing a 750 Oscar. Walt Hanskin in Cunningham's Maser. And here's the Works Elva Courier team run by Carl Haas of Chicago. And in '93, we know that Carl Haas has progressed beyond Elva Couriers, now runs the Lola Indy factory cars for Mario Andretti and world champ Nigel Mansell. A Corvette coming in, a Porsche going by, having problems with their Elvas. In the 2 years of CAMORADI's existence, CAMORADI's first win was in the summer of 1959. Dr. David Lane won the Grand Prix of San Salvador in a Porsche RSK. This is a beat-up Causey birdcage Maserati. They always seem to be hitting things. You'll see the front end, the bodywork are quite rumpled. And those tire experts in the group will see he's on Firestone tires, whereas CAMORADI ran Goodyear tires. They were always in the race, but never really contesting with anyone. Our first big Maserati outing was Nassau of 1959, where Carroll Shelby drove our new birdcage, led the race to the two-third distance, absolutely ran away from the field till the Didion tube broke. We sent the car over to Miami, installed a new Didion tube, sent that car to the Argentine 1,000-kilometer race, where Dan Gurney and Master Gregory led again for two-thirds of the race, till Dan jumped a curb, broke the gearbox, and we were out against strong opposition from Ferrari. Phil Hill went on to win that race. We then came to Sebring for our trouble-plagued event at Sebring in March, on to the Targa Florio in Sicily, where Umberto Maglioli, the great Italian